Hi everybody, it's Jackie Smurden in Dunnock Studio here in the heart of Norfolk in the UK. Got a little bit of sunshine in between showers today in our lovely hot sunny July, which it definitely isn't this year. So welcome to the studio. Today we're going to be looking at watercolour paper. For those of you who don't really have any idea about it, I'm trying to explain it in a simple format. Sorry, this video's gone on for a little bit longer than I planned, but I hope you get some use out of it. Any questions, pop them in the comments below. So we're going to have a quick roundup of watercolour paper, have a look at how watercolour paper works in different ways depending on the type of paper you use. I do apologise in advance because I've got a new laptop and the sound quality on this is not as good because it won't accept my microphone. So apologies for that. I've got to work that out before I do another video. Hopefully by then I'll have solved it, have a spanking new microphone that connects to this laptop, and you'll be able to hear me a lot better. Anyway, let's go on and look at some watercolour paper. So we've got a few bits to have a look at here. So I've been to Patchins and picked up some Rosemary & Co brushes. Got some test paper from St Cuthberts Mill, and I've got some black paint. I'm going to add some blue to it to get a bit of depth to the colour, but I thought black paint's a good way to show you some of the things and the effects that the different papers would give you. So hopefully you'll be able to see it a little bit more. So I'm gonna try and focus in on that a bit more. There we go. So going into my lovely set of Rosemary brushes, Rosemary & Co. This is a nice pretty one, isn't it? These are the Rose of England series. Yeah, that camera is very annoying because it keeps jumping about. So when you have a new brush, solid, nothing soft about this at all. There's nothing wrong with the brush. It just needs a wash out in your water because the brush has been protected with gum arabic, which is the same gunk that goes into the middle of your paints. It holds the paints together. So you just wash that off the brush, and as soon as you've done that, just give it a squeeze. You've got a lovely soft brush. So when you get a brand new brush and you find it solid, all you need to do is rinse it in some water and it will be fine. So what I'm using is these test papers that St Cuthberts Mill gave out at Patchins when I went along for some of the demos. And you get this lovely little set, and there's two sides to this set. There's Saunders Waterford there, and there's Bockingford and one Milford there. So I've just picked out the Bockingford, which is exactly the same as buying a block or a pad of Bockingford from another shop. You'll notice it's made in England. So there's a lot of information that I've just recently found out about this company and how they make their paper, which is not for this video. But I thought it'd be a good place for us to start because Bockingford is quite well known as an affordable paper for everybody to use. And if you look into it, you'll find that it's made from wood pulp, whereas other papers like Waterford are made from cotton, which is slightly better quality. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to stick to simple. So if you're upgrading from a really bog standard watercolour paper, you might well end up with Bockingford. So it's cellulose, which is basically based on wood pulps paper. It's not got cotton in it. So it's made on a mould, and It's acid free and archival, so it's a really good paper to use for imagining your paintings will be around in 200 or 300 years. They should be okay as long as they've not been exposed to sunlight, because this paper won't damage them. There's no acid in it. So that's all quite technical, so forget all of that, don't worry about that. So to make things as simple as I can possibly make them, watercolour paper comes in 3 basic types. This one you can see, hopefully, says HP, and then there's some numbers, and then it says it's white, and I can confirm this is white paper. So all of those things mean different things, but just for now just focus on the HP. That means it's hot pressed. Okay, hot press means it's been through hot rollers, whereas the middle one here is not, and that CP means it's cold pressed. And in Britain we then put brackets and not, because in Britain we like to make things complicated. So it's not hot pressed. That's all that word means. It's not hot pressed. It's cold pressed. It's been through cold rollers. So the sheets of paper going through rollers that are cold. So you've got your hot pressed, you've got your cold pressed, which is not hot pressed. Oh, it's hard, isn't it, this business? You've got to learn all this stuff. It gets easier. The last one of this basic introduction, you can see says rough. Okay, that sort of makes sense. It's not hot pressed, it's not cold pressed, it's rough. So it's basically gone through rollers that have got a rougher texture. Now, it's all very well me showing you this and saying, oh, look at this rough paper. You can't see it because it's a white sheet of paper on a camera screen going through your computer or your phone. Completely useless me doing that, isn't it? Because you can't see anything on that. So I thought what we could do, a little demo with some actual paints so you can get a feel for it. So what I'm going to do is pick up some of my blue and pop it into my black, which you can't see. So I'm going to keep it focused on very much on the paper here. So I've got some nice creamy paint and a nice flat brush. So this is the hot pressed paper. I'm going to do a very simple paint stroke down the middle of that. Not going to fuss with it, not going to lift my brush off. There you go. So that's hot pressed. We'll have a look at that again in a minute. Hot pressed paper is very, very smooth. Now Bockingford is not the best quality paper in the world, but for the purposes of what you and I will be doing, it's lovely paper. So it's smooth, and you can see that there's, although the water is sitting up here still, over down here the paint's gone on, it's relatively smooth, it's coming away from it, there's not much variation. So I'm just going to go next to it. This is the cold pressed or not hot pressed. I'm going to pop that paint on there. One nice big stroke. You might be able to see that there is a little bit of variation in the paint compared with this one. The cold pressed surface has got slightly more texture. So cold pressed is between rough and hot pressed. And let's have a look at the rough one. Simple paint stroke down. Quite got enough paint on there. Let's pop a bit more on. This is because the rough paper absorbs more paint because it's got more surface area. Now again, you might be able to see the texture on that is greater than the texture on that is greater than the texture on that. Very much the difference between the three. So why do you need to know this? Well, the simple answer to that is it depends on what you like to paint. So if you like to paint beautiful detailed portraits, smooth washes, for instance botanical work, then you're most likely going to be happiest with hot pressed paper. However, if you like to do really wild, wonderful washes and textures and throw all sorts of things into your paint to see what effects you get, you're going to really probably love the rough. But if you're in the middle and you like to do a bit of everything and try out different things, but you're not swayed one way or the other, you'll be quite comfortable in the middle with cold pressed watercolour paper, which is also known as a general purpose watercolour paper. So I'm now going to put on another colour which may or may not be as easy to see. So you might notice the hot pressed is still very wet at the top, so the water sits on the top a lot longer than it does on the others, which means you've got longer to work it. So here's a nice aqua colour. It's a little bit of variation where my brush has wobbled. Now let's try the cold pressed. Oh, I'm very happy when I'm swatching paint. Do you know what, if anybody was watching this, and they're not like everybody watching this now, because clearly you're all beautiful artists, they wouldn't understand what we were doing, would they? Once you start doing this, swatching paints, literally watching paint dry, something very therapeutic about it. And I know that those of you who've done it know exactly what I mean. So there we go, slightly different colour, a little bit lighter, but I think you can still see the difference between this one and this one. So it's not a huge difference in compared with some papers, but it starts to give you an idea. The textures there and there are just not present here. So if you like texture in your work, use a cold pressed, not, or a rough paper. If you like smoothness in your work, try the hot pressed. It takes a bit of getting used to. I'm not convinced that I will probably ever use it. So hopefully that makes some sense, and that you can start playing around with different papers if you're lucky enough to get some different papers. So if you like to explore different paper, Bromley's Art Supplies, they no longer have the Ken on the front, but Ken was the founder, have this watercolour paper starter pack. It is fabulous. You have different sheets, as you can see, 25 sheets when I bought it, that will give you all sorts of different textures, different colours. Some paper is very white, some paper is very cream. You can see the difference there. It means you can play with some papers, and you may well find there's one in there you didn't expect to like. So I do recommend a sample kit of paper if a supplier that you use does that sort of thing. For me it was Bromley's, and I'm very pleased with it, so I do recommend that. So this is the hot pressed paper, and another way to find out what paper does is to paint your picture first in water. And I know you can't see this, so I'll be quick. Now, once you've done that, you would then be wise to let it sit for a minute or two, but I'm doing a video and I've got no patience whatsoever, so I shall just go straight for this, see what happens. So pop your paint into your lovely brush and drop it into the water. Now this is hot press, so you can see straight away that the water is sitting very much on the surface, even though I know I haven't let it sink in. You're all shouting at the screen, goodness sake woman, just let it sink in a bit. Then you can tease it into the middle. This is hot press. All the botanical artists will be going mad now saying that's not how you paint, and that's absolutely fine. I am not a botanical artist, There are many amazing botanical artists. I am not one of them. But you get the idea. Paint is sitting in the water, which is still very firmly on top of this piece of watercolour paper. This is hot pressed, just to remind you. So now let's do the same thing again, as quick as I can, with the cold pressed. Going to do quick water flower. It's quite a nice way of painting actually. Pop the water on, squeeze your brush out, don't have it full of water, pick up your paint, using the point, drop it in. Again, I haven't let it sink in, too impatient. Just let you into a little story. While I was painting here earlier, unfortunately a little robin crashed into my window, which is very sad. And when I was a child, I used to rescue birds all the time. I used to end up in the airing cupboard. So I thought, well, I think he's had it. I wrapped him up, popped him on the chair outside, shut the offending pane of glass on the studio firmly closed so that he couldn't do it again, and walked away thinking he's had it. Well, he made it, guys. He just flew off. So wrapping him up, keeping him warm, giving him some time, did the trick. So that's a good news story for today, because it sort of put me off my recording really, because I was quite sad, but now it's okay. He's fine. He can carry on looking after his very late babies. He's working very hard. So there we go. Put that one to one side, and let's throw in the rough. So just to remind you, we're working on wood pulp paper, and it's Bockingford rough, and we're trying it. Yes, thank you, we're trying you. I'm going to put on some flower petals using the shape of the brush. I'm not going to be very patient and wait even just a minute for that to dry. I'm just getting it on there. Us artists, very busy people. And I'm going to throw a little bit of black in here. Well, actually I wasn't, but I accidentally threw too much in. So this is going to be a very dark flower. I'm going to drop the colour in. Oh my goodness, it's more black than blue. Never mind. Okay, can make of that what you will. The black lotus. I was taking photos today of flowers. All the wildflowers we saw were all pink. Even the brambles were deep pink. Trying to work out why they were pink. I haven't got enough water there because I'm working on rough. The water has sunk in really quickly, so it's not pulling away as it would have done before, but that's fine. This is just to show you the idea. So there we go. And because I put black into that one, I'm going to go back into the cold pressed, and I'm going to drop some black right in the middle there, which is still quite damp. There we go, look how strong that is. Leave it to one side, and then we go back to the hot pressed one, which is still absolutely soaking wet, because hot pressed paper takes a lot longer for that water to disappear. So it's actually watering down the black I'm putting into the middle here, and it's actually quite hard to control this. It's going wherever it wants. Oh my goodness, look at that. This is why I don't generally use hot press, because it is very difficult to control. So we'll come back to those. So I mentioned the Bockingford block, or Bockingford in general, which was the test papers we're doing. So you can buy Bockingford in all sorts of ways, but it's made by St Cuthberts Mill, and it's made in England. Ta-da! So yes, it's a beautiful paper. I do actually love that. Then you can get similar blocks. This is made by Jackson's, a really good art company. If you're into your art, recommend Jackson's. why am I showing you blocks, which could confuse you? There's a block and there's a block. There is a reason they're called blocks. They're called blocks because they are solid blocks of paper. And at the end here, which you really won't be able to see, there is a little gap in the gum that's holding the paper together. I can feel the gap there. You obviously can't see that. So when you paint on this side, it doesn't curl up. And when you're finished and it's dry, you put something in there, a little knife or even a credit card, and you slice all the way around and your paper comes off perfectly flat. So that's what a block is. You can also get beautiful non-block pads of paper like this. So there's only one gummed edge on that, which is obviously that edge. So when you tear that off, you've got a loose piece of paper. Obviously they come in spirals as well. I haven't got any spiral ones. So still made by the same company. There's a theme here, isn't there? Not that I ever noticed this before, but when I'm inspired and I go to workshops with other artists, they generally use St Cuthberts Mill paper. So this is interesting. Doing this for you is making me see the sort of patterns that I've got. Then there's things completely different like this. Oh, this is Khadi paper. Khadi is made in India, and you will notice it's 100% cotton. Now I'm not going to go into using this today for the simple reason is it is quite an advanced paper to be using if you're a beginner, only because it's very different to the other ones. It's extremely rough. So we'll have a look at Khadi on another day. And then there's another one I met at the show, Pan Art. This is handmade paper with a white decal edge. You might have heard of deckled edges. You can't really see it, you can just about see it in there. It's rough, that's the edge of the actual paper because it's been handmade into sheets. So same with this Khadi paper, it's handmade, it's rough, it's not been cut, it's been torn or however they do it. I think they cut them when they're wet. Now once upon a time, a long time ago, I did make some paper. You may have done it yourself where you drop the paper pulp with water into a mesh, pop it down, you might put things into it, colours, flower seeds, etc. And when you take it out, it has this decal edge because it's not been cut. So do you understand that side of it? I haven't used this one yet. This is, ooh, could be fun. I have used Khadis before, they take some getting used to. But there you go, there's just a few examples of some paper just to whet the appetite, and not forgetting, if you're not sure, get yourself a starter pack from Bromley Art Supplies or similar suppliers are available, because they are a good way of trying out different papers. The most important thing is do not put them in a drawer and save them for best, which I've done, is get them out and paint on them. It doesn't matter if it goes wrong. I had a fantastic, wonderful piece of cotton watercolour paper that I used and it went awfully wrong. It was a mess, but I've used it in a collage, so hey, you win some, you lose some. So we're about 20 minutes in from me painting these, and the rough is still wet, the cold pressed is still damp, and the hot pressed is still a lake. Might as well have rivers running out of it. It's absolutely wet as anything. You can see the shine on it. So I'm going to have to come back to these in a little while. So I'm literally watching paint dry here. This hot press paper is nearly a half an hour, still wet. So anyway, whilst we're waiting for those to dry, I thought I'd just go with one more technique which will show you some of the differences in the paper. Some of you may have tried this technique, some of you may not. It's called a dry brush technique. You drag your brush sideways across the paper. You try to make broken marks, suggesting water. You try again on cold pressed paper, and suddenly you have a sparkle because the paper has got some ridges picking up. Then you try on the rough paper and it skips even more because the ridges are higher. So let's put a little bit more paint on, take the excess off and then go over again, still leaving those lovely gaps even though I've double paint amount on it. So dry brush, so I've just finished there and I'm going back to this one to show you. I'm not changing how I do it. That is going across and not skipping. There's a gap because the paint and the brush pressure is different, but it's really not brilliant. The cold press has given me a lovely sparkling effect. The rough was so rough I had to put more paint on, so I've lost some of that sparkle. If you imagine that was water, that cold press is a really good effect. So dry brush technique, have your brush almost parallel to the paper, use some old bit of paper to take off the excess. So you get some paint, take off the excess first till it starts to break. You'll know when it's broken, then pop it on your paper. There you go, sparkling water. Ta-da! I think you can safely say that sparkling water is not possible with a dry brush technique on hot press paper. However, on cold press paper, it is a really nice technique, and the cold press is a good all-round paper for that reason. This one, there's nothing wrong with this. I've been over it twice. Because it was rough, it took a lot more paint. The paint skipped over the very much more deep ridges in the paper, so it's just as good as the cold press, but you just need to have a bit more paint on your brush. You can see this is still wet because it's running into this. So yes, I've got a little bit of drying time to go through now, but most of all on this hot press paper, look at that, it's absolutely soaking wet. So popping water onto your paper first and adding paint second is quite an interesting way to paint on hot press. We'll go back to these when they're properly dry. So lesson number 1, hot press paper. This flower that I painted with water first and then dropped paint in took forever to dry, and I mean a long time. I speeded it up with a hairdryer, but it would have taken well over an hour. It's quite a nice effect. You can probably see it's quite soft, very, very subtle, nothing too much going on. The same for these on this side. You've got a smooth wash, if you like. Dry brush, complete and utter failure because there's no ridges in the paper. So when I run my hand across here, it's smooth, it's hot pressed. So results for that compared with the cold pressed, which is not hot pressed. Can you see the texture in that flower where the paint, especially the blue, has settled into the paper where the ridges are and split, which is known as granulation. On this side, there's not too much of it going on, but you can see there's a little bit of patterning there in the tops of those paints. I've got a beautiful dry brush here. It's generally quite a smooth wash, but give it some water and let it go, you will get a little bit of granulation going on, as you can see with the cold pressed paper. Finishing with the rough, we've got not a great deal of difference between that and the cold press, but you can see that texture on the black and the turquoise on the left. You can certainly see the texture in the black flower. Now, to be fair, that's a slightly different colour to the cold press flower I did earlier, so it's not a great comparison. However, because I accidentally dropped loads of black in, it's you can see there's textures that are going on there. Can you see that? Well, you would not get that with hot press paper. So if you want to be wild and amazing with your watercolours, try rough paper. The dry brush needs more paint, and therefore I've covered a bit more of it up because I went over twice, but the ridges in the paper absorb more paint because there's a larger surface area, because the paint just doesn't go straight across, it goes up and down as well. So bear that in mind when you're mixing your washes. So rough is nice for texture and for getting the best out of leaving your paints to do their own thing whilst they're drying, and you get these lovely nuances in the paper which the paint has pulled out some way and then softened in other areas where there's more water, so you get lovely effects like that. So if you were doing a botanical painting, this is one I did with an artist workshop by the Iceni Botanical group of a tulip. So this was on hot press paper. It took quite a few hours to do, and it was, shall we say, it was an experience. Would I do it again? Probably not, but the hot press paper allowed you to lay washes down that are very, very, very straightforward. They don't go wandering off, they don't make textures. So you're doing a botanical painting, and if you're into portraits, the same thing applies. So that would be for your hot pressed smooth paper, which is quite a bit different to using something a little bit more rough. So cold pressed or rough paper, can you see on here we've got that dry brush technique in the background, which you would just not get on hot press paper. There's a little bit of gentle simple washes in the middle. So this is cold press paper, this is not rough, but you still get that ability to go from texture to smoothness on the same painting. So cold press paper is absolutely a really good choice if you are, as I am, a general purpose artist who likes to do different things. So yeah, cold pressed is a really good choice. So just one more thing to tell you on this very short, not introductory lesson on paper, is the weight of the paper. And if you look at these three that we've just looked at and painted on, you can see they've all got the same numbers next to them: 300 grams per meters squared, brackets 140 pounds. Now, this is not the video to explain to you in great detail about what that means. However, all you need to remember is the higher the number, the heavier the paper, and the less likely it is to buckle when you're using it. So this, you can't really see the weight of a paper on a video, but it's like a postcard. It doesn't bend over like an A4 piece of printer paper would. So the weight of the paper means you don't have to stretch it. Now, stretching paper is a whole new universe which I do not delve into. If you would like to learn about stretching paper, just type stretching watercolour paper into Google or YouTube and it will pop up immediately. Lots of people will show you. However, I work at 300 grams per metre squared, 140 pounds and up. That generally means I do not need to stretch my paper. If I want to go higher numbers, you can go really thick. Then you get even more ability to pour water and paints onto your paper, and it will stay rigid despite the water you throw at it. But for my purposes, 300 or 140, which is exactly the same weight, there's just a different way of describing it, is perfectly adequate, and one of the ones that's in the middle range is, if you go lower than that, you're really looking at drawing and sketching paper, not painting paper. But you can stretch it, and people do. but as I say, it's a whole new world. So my advice is go slightly thicker, don't worry about stretching it, and don't forget the blocks that we talked about earlier, which will give you the ability to paint straight onto a sheet of watercolour paper that has been gummed at the edges, so all the way round it's gummed, and therefore when you finish, the paper is nice and solid in the middle, and there's an arrow on this one to show you where to break the seal the rest of the way round, so that's really handy. So a block is a really good choice, but even this block we hunt on here is 300 grams metre squared, 140 pounds. So even though it's gummed all the way round, it's still that weight, so it's less likely to buckle and do weird things. You can flatten paper even if it buckles, so don't ever worry about it. But there you go, there's the one to start with. Anything above 300 or above 140, higher numbers mean thicker paper. That's all you need to remember. So that's a little summary on that. So I hope you found that helpful. Again, apologies for the sound. I know it's going up and down, and I will try and fix it, I promise. All this technology you have to get used to when you're doing videos. It's quite a challenge. All I want to do is paint. Anyway, I hope that works for you with a paper. Go and try the papers that you've got. You'll soon find out what suits your style. If you like lots of water, lots of textures, you want some nice heavyweight rough paper. If you are fine detail, smooth kind of painter, then you want the hot press paper. And you might want to go and look up stretching paper, which yes, you can if you like, but I'm not going to go with you on that one. So anyway, get out there, get painting, use whatever paper you've got to hand, and buy the best paper you can. Don't go mad, but the most important thing you can buy in your kit for watercolour is decent paper. If you have the best brushes in the world and the best paint in the world, and you put them onto really, really bad paper, it just doesn't work. So treat yourself to some decent paper. It does not have to be super expensive, but just make sure you go for something decent. And by decent, I mean that all that information we've just looked at is on there. You can find it, and it's a brand that you may or may not recognise. If you're not sure, look them up. And then there's some reasonable prices in amongst all of those. You don't have to spend a fortune. And hold fire from the handmade papers for now, because they're super expensive. And just enjoy yourselves, and just let that paint, watch it dry and let it do its thing, and you'll see some amazing effects. So happy painting, thanks for visiting, and see you soon. Take care, bye.